worried about that, because if we are so worried about failures, and if we do not incorporate that 95% the figure of failure there, then startups are never going to happen, because such is the dynamic.
So let me first congratulate Manu on his book. And let me say that it goes to heart of something I spend a lot of time doing. You see, the fear of failure is a major failing of a society if it wants to be driven by entrepreneurial energy, innovation, etc. You will hear very often people will say, yes, we want an economy based on entrepreneurship and innovation and so on. And what they are not saying is that that necessarily means it is a risk-taking society. So what I'm doing here, let me say, is taking the attention a little away, because much of Manu's work is really about individuals doing that. But my policy work is about dealing with whole societies with the same problem. So how do you prepare societies for situations where there's continuous failure and it is not seen as a moral failing? So let me give you an example of something that was a major problem. So everybody sees the idea that creative destruction leads to progress is not new. I mean, this has been around for almost a century. But many of you will know this. We did not have an insolvency and bankruptcy code in India till 2016. Why? Because the idea was that if only we planned it, had this intelligent design up front, the wise people sitting in planning commission had only done their maths perfectly, we would have this perfect economy. And of course, for half a century we tried it and didn't get anywhere. Far better, which is what we have now do, is to create a framework which allows continuously things to be tried out by the private sector, and for some of it at least to fail. But then, as Manu will say, that you have to plan for this. You have to create a system of this failure. Now, the insolvency and bankruptcy system consequently is absolutely critical, and it's incredible that we didn't have a proper system of insolvency and bankruptcy till as recently as 2016. What used to happen if a company went bad was that it was, especially if it's a big one, would be that it would be sent off something called the BIFR. Some of you here will remember what it means. So BIFR was a warehouse for bad assets that went wrong. They would be kept alive in the name of jobs or whatever it was at taxpayers' cost, but essentially perpetuating poor performance. Now, starting 2017, one of my jobs, by the way, was to clean up the banking system. Some of you will remember, back in 2016, our banking system was basically bust. So the thinking then was to create a bad bank, put all these bad assets there, and let them we'll do something about it while getting the banking system going again. If we had done that, we would still have been dealing with some warehouse with all those bad assets. Instead, what we did is we just liquidated these assets. Some of India's largest companies got liquidated. Did anything bad happen out of that? No. In fact, many of them were large steel companies which we bankrupted. They were bought up by other steel companies, and today India is the world's second largest steel producer. Nothing bad happened. In fact, because they now were owned by more efficient entrepreneurs, we actually added jobs, capacity, and so on and so forth. And of course, meanwhile, the banks got their money back and they carried on. The same thing is true about the culture of startups. The good news is that if you go to Indian universities today, the culture itself has changed. So when I was at university, who were the cool people in college? They were either student activists of some sort, or doing student politics, that kind of.
Really? They were the uncool ones.
Back in the late 80s, early 90s, the cool kids were all trying to be some sort of social activist. Today, the cool kids in campuses are doing their startups. Now that's a cultural change. And that is quite incredible, because I am a chancellor of a university as well. And it is quite stunning. Kids are trying to do all kinds of things while studying. They're all trying to set up a startup or doing some innovative thing. And that cultural change fits directly into what Manu is talking about, because that is about a society that celebrates continuously doing things. And of course, most of what these kids are doing is going to fail. But it is now okay to fail. And a lot of the progress and growth, etc., that we are seeing in India is driven by a greater acceptance of failure. Now, the point that Manu is making, that we can then plan for this, and that create a framework. I talked about the insolvency and bankruptcy code, but there are many other things, including social values, that are important to create a culture of failure.
Right. I have another follow-up question for you before I move to other panelists. What about when failure is designed and it's not out of a bona fide intention. It is malified intention. And
No, of course, if there is some malified intention, then that, if you are failing deliberately because whatever you spite the owner of the company, or you want to siphon money off, or whatever may be the reason, then of course there are ways of
do we have mechanisms to
yeah,
address?
so
I mean,
that is always there.
mechanism.
Fraud has always been been outlawed. The problem was that before we had an insolvency and bankruptcy code, our view was that failure was some sort of a moral failing, i.e., there was a fraud. Whereas once you actually had an insolvency and bankruptcy code and you bankrupted people, interestingly, the credit culture improved. In fact, these frauds went down.
Right, and what about when something becomes too big to fail? Indigo, for example. I mean,
Nothing is too big to fail. Jet Airways shut down. Did anything bad happen? No. In fact, Indigo's rise itself is because of the failure of Jet. My view is that while one should not tax success and growth, at the same time, if you have a situation where a party is misusing its monopolistic power, then those who are regulators should have no sense of humor about it. But at the same time, we are not socialists, and so it is not the case that you should punish anybody for success. But yes, if there is a concern that monopolistic power is being misused, then you should have no sense of humor about pushing back against it.
Right, to have fair competition.
Yeah, fair competition has been there. We have something called a competition commission. In the specific area of civil aviation, there is a civil aviation ministry that looks into this. So it is not the case, and in fact, this current episode that happened was specifically happened because the government and the civil aviation ministry stepped in to enforce certain rules. And when that happens, it causes some disruption. But as a society, we need to be willing to accept this. That's the point I'm making. Look, every time something goes wrong, especially if it's a big thing, there will be some turbulence. Now, just because there's going to be turbulence, we should not as a society say, oh my God, there'll be turbulence, let it be. No. The point is, whether it's bankruptcy or enforcing regulation or whatever it is, the idea is that certain level of acceptance of turbulence from failure should be a part of the design of our society.
And we should fasten the seatbelts.
Yeah.
Right, Manu, you had something to add to.
Just some boundary conditions in addition to fraud. I think the other kinds of failures that are also something we shouldn't tolerate, and that is due to laziness, stupidity, incompetence. Just to put a lot of these things out there, I don't want to normalize all kinds of failure. It's particular ones, and I think you described very well in the economics and the entrepreneurship side. It's just a little comment I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think the distinction is very important, lest we just glorify something which is essentially harmful. Sanjoy, you dwell in the world of uncertainties, but worlds of endless possibilities, and maybe Sanjeev cannot take certain steps, but you can, because arts and the space that you operate in, it allows you a little more flexibility, because the stakes are lower, if I dare say, but this word failure is not really that bad a word in the world of the arts. It's actually romanticized quite a bit.
I don't think any filmmaker or theater director or writer sets out to make a flop film or a bad book or a bad piece of theatre. Everybody wants to make that Academy Award winning film or a blockbuster book or series, etc. A failure is something that's inherent, and as you said, it's not necessarily nothing romantic about it. But in the way that it's laid out, what Sanjeev said, there are primarily, if you set up an environment where you can take a risk and you ensure that there is a safety net to that risk, then you will ensure that the population is able to go out irrespective of the idea of failure. I'll give you an example, Singapore example. Both Sanjeev and Manu are Singapore. When we first set up office in Singapore in 2001, at that point of time, the Singapore government had given us, I think, $5 million to set up shop because they'd come to Edinburgh to see what we'd been doing, and they said, we want our arts economy to flourish, and we believe that this will be the future of Singapore as a city, as an economy, and will drive the innovation economy. So if you have creativity, you'll drive innovation. And I remember the minister asking me, Sanjoy, we've given you this, in 10 years, everything in Singapore is 10 years. They just invested 1.3 billion Singapore dollars into the arts economy. They said, what would you achieve in 10 years? So I said, and they said, will everybody play the violin or some such? So I said, well, some people will play the violin, some people will sing, some people will play the piano, some people will play football, and some people may not do any of the above. So that didn't get him very excited. And then I said, thank you for this money, but we can only use this money and be successful in your environment if you do not censor anything that we do. And the minister immediately said, that can't be done. This is our state policy. This is what we've done for whatever number of years. It's not possible. And I said, well, if you do ask us to build your creative economy or creativity sector and tell us that when we're working with people, they cannot think about A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but they can think about X, Y, Z, I said it doesn't add up. To their credit, they went back, they had a cabinet meeting, came back to us and said, anything that you do, we won't censor. This is 2001. Because they did take that risk, and they did want to ensure that there was an environment in which, given the risk, there would still be way more productivity and way more creation and innovation. And I was asking Manu, I loved, for those of you who may have read the book or haven't read the book, you'll see in one of the last, maybe the last chapter perhaps, I'm not sure, he talks about how his elder son used to sit on his stomach, and he got him to learn to count by basically holding on to his paw and not allowing him to use his finger. He's right there. And in contrast, I asked Manu, so how did your producer, Dr. Kapur, how did she, or how did they teach these two boys to be able to get into a productive mindset? Did they have failure as parents of a particular generation do? I mean, our parents always were worried about what we would do. And my father used to ask Punita, my wife, what should I introduce my younger son as? My elder son is an economist, nuclear physicist, but what should I say of my younger son? I can't tell people that he's a creative person or, whatever he is. So there was a sense of ensuring that you did right by who you were. More and more, I think there's so many educationists here, Mrs. Chona, there's Abha Adam, there's so many people. You have to allow young people to learn their own way. And, the way that Manu has written this, my contrarian point would be, yes, in safe societies, and today much of Europe, where you say, mind the gap between the train and the platform, or this tin of nuts has nuts in it, or this bottle of milk has milk, beware. There are safe societies. Safe societies do not necessarily allow for competition beyond a particular point. They do not allow for a hunger, which is the reason to a large extent we're seeing the rise of what we call the third world, or certainly China and India and many of these other economies like Brazil, etc., because we do not come from safe spaces. What we have to do every day is negotiate our very existence. If you look at the kinds of people that have come up through, I mean, given the issues that we have with a scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, and given the illiterate population that we did have, today, whether it's the President of India or many people up and down that road, you are seeing everyday people being lifted from poverty, not necessarily because of government, but because there's a hunger and an environment in which they can succeed. That's the responsibility. If you're looking at productive failure at the end of the day, the one word that I would include in this is empathy. How do you ensure that there is an environment of empathy as opposed to an environment where you're always being looked at that if you step out of line or if you color out of the margins, you're going to be arrested, thrown in, somebody's going to persecute you, as opposed to, as Sanjeev just said, in terms of make sure that you have all your basic tenets in place, but make sure you do it with a sense of empathy. If we do not appreciate empathy in the idea of failure, then you are setting up for failure being the be all and end all of everything and people not being able to move forward.
Right. Thank you so much, Sanjoy. And this idea of empathy, I think it just gives me a chance to bring in the educationists into the discussion, because our education design, the pre-university education, which is the formative stage of a person's life, we seem to have lost the empathy thing, or maybe it was never there, because I know and all of that what you said, the parents' fear about their children's success or failure were largely dependent or emanated from how they are going to perform in boards. My childhood was ruined because of that, because I did not do mathematical tables. I had no idea how to do seven. Seven ka table was like my nemesis. I could never do it. So yes, my childhood was ruined. There was no empathy there. I had other skills. So do you feel, sir, that education without empathy has actually been a curse for this country? And you've been exposed to two boards and you have headed them both. So, yes, we would like to know that. And maybe I get my childhood will get some closure.
So I will very simply say, if there is anything wrong in the society, finally the blame will come to education. Yeah, so either parents or the teachers. If you do well, it is it's the merit of the child. But otherwise, all the blames goes to parents or the teachers. So having said that, the India's education system, it creates a kind of mediocrity. We don't allow our students to fail. That environment we purposefully do not create. So every parent, every school, everyone loves to celebrate success. We don't analyze failures. And if you meet any school heads, immediately, they always boast the achievement, 100 out of 100. And 99.99% children qualified with 95% above or the near to 100% mark. So we celebrate that. And with that, one advantage is also there. Most of our children, particularly from the middle class segment, they all are doing well. And so Indian diaspora is a celebrity factor across the world. You are also one of them. So there are multiple factors, but it's very important to allow our children to fail and also to develop empathy, to treat the failures, how to accept failures in life. So it's a culture we need to develop in our society. For example, in the research field, you don't find many researchers today because once the research is failed, there is no
Funding
support.
stops.
Funding is stopped. There is no support mechanism. So that is why you don't find many patents registered by Indians. The Indian universities or Indian education system does not allow anyone to fail. If you are not coming out as a successful researcher, the future is totally uncertain. The quality of life will have a very big impact. So such things are also very important. See, in the school education system, in the school ecosystem, it's very important to develop a mindset to attempt. Failure can be there. Like Albert Einstein said, if I fail 1,000 times, I learn 1,000 ways of doing things. That's of course it will be there. But how to navigate or how to move forward, how to help and support by showing empathy to the fellow human beings, that's very important. So the national education policy, the focus is now on moving away from rote learning. That means we are moving away from the obsession of marks to skill set and ability of the individual. If you are skillful, if you are capable, if you are talent, you can do anything in life. And that confidence building needs to happen through education. So education should bring that confidence in every individual to identify the potential in every human being. That is what the education is looking for. Once it happens, the sky is the limit.
Thank you. Sanjeev, you have to tell me when you want to leave the stage, so I will give you. Yeah, you have 5 10 minutes. So, Mr. Subramaniam, I would like to get your thoughts on why we have not been able to do a few things that we should have done maybe 3 decades ago. What are the challenges there? I mean, why rote learning is still being discussed on this stage?
Yeah. First, let me congratulate Manu for this wonderful Indian edition of the book. And I had the privilege of reading his international edition. And that prompted me to invite him to a national conference held by me in Bangalore last month. And he was so courteous to come online and talk to the principals, about 300 principals. And I think 300 principals considered him as a hero, right? And I think he deserves a big clap for that, right? I'm getting inquiries, when are you going to invite him for a personal, so the impact in the book has already made that. Secondly, before I answer your question, I wish that 3 people should have been present in the conference today. One was Martin Seligman, called the father of positive psychology. If he had been here, he would have looked at the qualifying word for the failure, and he would have celebrated the word the productive failure as a disruption to the very concept of failure which we have nurtured for over decades. The word failure is not exclusive to education. It is probably integrated into our cultural mindset. And in terms of education, I don't think that in the pre-Macaulay model, we never celebrated the word failure. But in the post-Macaulay model, the word gained a lot of currency. And then we came into what is called a 35% of award to be given as a gateway to a promotion, accepting 65% of failure by others, right? So our whole mindset with regard to celebration of performance of people has been wrong. The second person whom I thought should have been today should have been Winston Churchill, because he said, when defining excellence, he said, excellence is moving from one failure to another with greater enthusiasm. I don't think there is no better definition about productive failure right here. The third person which I wish he had, who should have been Edmund Hillary, when he looked at the Mount Everest after for failing to achieve it. He said, "Hey Mount Everest, you cannot grow bigger than what you are, but I can grow bigger than what I am." I think that's a message the productive failure is giving. I think that is the message. To me, the problem is it's not an exclusive academic problem. It is a social mindset problem, right? Because we have defined careers, we have defined performances, we have set goals and targets for children to achieve, and thereby we limit their competencies, right? When I looked at the book, the the dynamics he has given from moving from unproductive success to unproductive failure to productive success to productive failure. I think that is a very important dynamic which we, our children, should also know. And I think it's a huge opportunity for creating a, teacher sensitivity about this book. I strongly believe. And to be very honest with you, after reading this book, I have been deliberating on the idea of starting a failure lab in schools. Why not my children go and celebrate a failure there and reinvent what they could do? I think this is what we need to be working on the future. I think that let's not do, as he often says, don't do a postmortem. So let's not do a postmortem. I think we are at the turning point. We always say that life has no ends, only bends. We are at the bend now. It's an opportunity to go. Yeah, before I close, I just wanted to say a very personal example why this book appealed to me personally. Because I remember my day when I was a student. I was moving from Madurai to Chennai for an admission to a school. I studied in Tamil medium and not English medium. When I went for an admission, the headmaster of the school asked me, "I will give you 5 spellings, and if you tell me the correct answer, I will give you the admission." And he said, "Enough." I said, "ENUF." And he said, "Knife." I said, "NIFE." He said, "Education." I said, EGUSKASION. You know what would have happened? My father's face went pale, and I could not get the admission. Well, I got somewhere and did it. But the privilege was the efforts that I made gave me the opportunity to become the principal of the same school which rejected me.
That's a lovely story, sir.
So, the question is, there's nothing called failure. Right? It is only it's a way how you look at it. Sometimes there is a huge market of people suppressing others as failure because they have an advantage. Right? I think that's the message I want.
Right. Thank you so much. Sanjeev, the question to you is, now we have heard the educationists here. We have talked a lot about India's supposed demographic dividends, and I think the jury is out whether we've been able to harness that or we have already squandered it. Is anything happening on that account? And is there anything which can still arrest this loss, this colossal loss that we're looking
So
at?
first of all, I disagree entirely with you that there's some loss. We have just entered into our demographic dividend phase, and we will be here for 25, 30 years. And this idea that we aren't growing fast is not true. India is the world's fastest growing economy, and we are generating enormous numbers of jobs. In fact, in many sectors, we actually have shortages of people. Anyway, having said that, we do need to invest into skilling. There's no doubt on that. I'm not an expert on school education. I will talk mostly about tertiary education, but let me make a more general point as well. While I understand the annoyance with rote learning, which I also have, we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because you do need a system of examinations to see progress in learning. So I actually disagree with this idea that somehow these tests and exams and maybe even obsession with marks is a bad thing. Because what is the alternative to judge success? I, for one, for example, am good at taking exams, which meant that I went through my entire schooling system ignoring my teachers. Okay? Essentially did not allow my teachers to in any way interfere with my education. I learned whatever I wanted, took the exams, did well, and continued to do whatever I wanted in class. Anytime the teacher paid attention to me, I was disruptive, so they left me alone. So there are various ways different people deal with it. But those exams were important because a person like me wouldn't learn anything at all if I didn't have to hit those benchmarks. So the case against rote learning should not be held as a case against exams, because exams, the point should be to improve the questions and the way of testing. It's not about getting rid of exams at all. I want to make this point because very often we go into these long conversations, let's make classes ever more small. Somebody like me would never survive a small class. Okay? I want the largest possible.
Because you're so disruptive that you would want
Yeah,
to
yeah.
be
Then I
hiding
get
behind.
a teacher paying attention to me. Bad news. Okay. Then I have to say I enjoyed university life much better because, as I said, in those days attendance wasn't such a imposed thing. And I went to Oxford where there's no need for attendance at all. You have to turn up and go to. So let's talk about tertiary education, which I still have some dealings with. As I said, I am the chancellor of a university, and I also participate in various policy discussions on it. So in this context, let me say, tertiary education is going to go through very radical changes in the next decade. So much so that the university that you see today may not even exist. So, for example, lecture-based classroom, education through lectures is already outdated. AI can give better lectures, it can test your knowledge, and in any case, if you do want to listen to a human lecturer, why would you want to listen necessarily to your own professor when you can listen to the best guy in the world on YouTube? So that form of imparting knowledge is already dead. Now, how fast universities adapt to this is a different matter. But therefore, what is it that universities or education should be doing? So, of course, my own view is university should concentrate on 2-3 things. One is exams to test with for certification of knowledge. 2, research, which means great tolerance for failure, because all research means that you are pushing the frontiers of knowledge. And the third is various forms of experiential learning, which must mean that my view is that university education will now merge with skilling and apprenticeships. I am not a person who buys this idea that you need to go to university because it has various kinds of great social interactions is why I go to university. Well, if that is the case, well, it's much cheaper to go to a cafe. If you want to go through tertiary education, I myself think that we need to create strong system of apprenticeships. People should go to work at 18. If they want to learn something, let there be certification systems. And once or twice a year, you can actually have classrooms, 3 months or 2 months, you go to a university, maybe you learn together for things that you need to learn together. But by and large, I think this 20th century phenomenon, 20th century form of the university is already dead.
But I think, and I very respectfully disagree with the point of basic instruction. Manu talks about that. Do we need just direct instruction? We don't really.
No. So you don't need an exam to see whether you understood how to solve the problem. Maybe in a different way.
Yeah, but the university is actually not the space for direct instruction, really. It is also the space where ideas come together and then something is
I can assure you,
created.
YouTube does a much better way of doing that than universities.
We'll continue to fight.
I want to mediate this, yeah? With science, right? So one of the things we were able to show in our research was, A, we need to develop better instruments to measure learning. So this could be exams, but these are also additional instruments that test your understanding, which you can't test in exams as much, but even more so, your ability to adapt and transfer to novel situations. So what you know to apply to really novel situations. Again, that cannot come out on exams, in standardized exams, right? So in our experiments, when we compared, what you call, say, rote learning or direct instruction, when you switch to productive failure, we are still measuring knowledge and skills. Yes. But our experiments show that once you switch, the deepest effects are on your conceptual understanding and transfer, which brings me back to the point that yes, you need an assessment system, But the point of productive failure is to use failure early to learn in deep understanding so that this failure is reduced. So you're right, we need some benchmarks. We can even improve those benchmarks. But how do you get to learn in a way that helps you get success on those benchmarks? That systematic, principled way of designing in the classrooms, in companies, in organizations, that's the proposition that I advance in this book. So it's not one or the other.
Yeah.
It's a way of orchestrating that.
Right. Sanjoy.
I was just looking at Sanjeev, I was just looking at Abha's face when you were saying about how disruptive you were, and I could see her saying, I need to speak to his parents. I need to speak to his parents immediately.
My parents took education as childcare just to get me out of the hair.
You know, the two things that are actually quite fascinating in the book is he talks about, I think it was in Doom School, where the kids come into class and speak to the professors about what is 90% or what is 85%. Was that in Doom School? So he had a fascinating thing where the kids and the parents together collectively took a call as to what meant what was the weighted average that was given to something, and that allowed for a greater understanding. The other thing was very interesting was the closed experiment where you have chaos, you have chaos and then you have ordered chaos and then you lead to some kind of resolution, both very interesting. But I'm going to give you a story. I'm a storyteller, so I have to give you a story. So one of the things, because I have long hair, I also got 4%, by the way, in math in my 11th standard because I hated my math.
I got grace marks, Sanjoy.
Okay, so I got 4%, but I now sit in the world math, world propagation of math, whatever thingamajig, long hair. But Salam Balak Trust, which is an organization for street children, which I helped set up about 37 years ago, we have kids who are not lettered and run away from different parts of the world or different parts of the country, come to us, we look after them, we take them through an education process, and we try and ensure that they get equal privilege across in whatever way possible. So many of our kids have been so successful from Salam Balak Trust, primarily because there's no concept or thing about failure, because they come from backgrounds which are so difficult, where the very concept of failing in engineering or education, so there's no question of them having taken a risk. Whatever they do will better their circumstances. Vicky Roy, for example, a young kid who ran away from his hometown, came to us. His teacher at Salam Balak Trust in his 10th standard said to him, listen, you're not great at schooling, why don't you think of doing something else? He goes on and takes on photography. He then gets mentored by a couple of people who we send him to. He gets picked up by the World Photography Association and Silverstein and Maybach as one of the 4 young people in the world to be invited to record the rebuilding of the World Trade Center. Today, Vicky gets more money by doing TED Talks or talks across the world, and much of the work that he does sits in mainstream museums like MoMA or Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, etc., Seattle, because of who he is. So how did he get there? He got there because there wasn't this whole concept of I'm going to fail. For him, there was no place for him to fail. He was already down there. Everything that he did thereof, the hunger that he felt that he needed to be in a place, and he's got a great sense of empathy. He's presently doing a 6-year project pro bono, recording people with challenges, and he's called it Everybody is Good at Something. So he goes from village to village, photographing these people with a disability, but showing that they're good at something. So somebody with no hands is great at cricket because he plays cricket with his bat under his chin and bowls with his foot. Somebody who's blind runs up the coconut tree and plucks a coconut without being able to see. These are the things we need to look at. And it's extremely important, as Manu has done in the book at one point of time, is what is this measurement that we talk about failure or success? What is failure? What is success? Who identifies it? Today, sadly, every time we look at success, it's who's made a billion or a million or a trillion, forgetting that most of it is a scam. Follow the money, it's a scam. So, what do we need to instill as educationists? Ensuring there's empathy and good civic pride. Sanjeev's left. You need to do a book about productive failure for government. Does government ever learn? Government never learns. Look at the education system. I mean, what are we saying? It's all very well to have a control system, but till we learn from failure, last week I had to sack a CEO of an organization which I chair. And why did I sack him? Because after a year I realized that he was not willing to learn from what he had done wrong, and he didn't have transparency, and he didn't have a moral compass.
Integrity.
Not that he wasn't successful.
Integrity.
Integrity is again whose integrity?
No.
So those are slightly different concepts, but yeah.
Manu, this idea of, I mean, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but after I read your book, I thought that what you were advocating for was this essentialism, that knowledge is multidisciplinary, it is interdisciplinary. So if you need to learn math, you learn music, you learn the art, and math will come. And knowledge does not exist in silos. That's the idea. So you talk about how when you stimulate what you already know, it just prepares a very fertile ground for the knowledge that you will eventually absorb. Is that correct? That everything is actually connected.
Yeah.
No need for silos.
No. So, yes, you need to activate the prior knowledge, because we build new knowledge based on what we know. The problem with a novice is they do not know what they know. They even do not know what they know. So I'm not so worried about what they do not know, but as an educator, the first job is to find out what they know. Now, typically we go into a classroom, so we give them a test of what you've covered as a way of knowing what they know. Well, that is just the formal knowledge of what they've learned. But novices know much more than that. Their lived experience of mathematics or science is far beyond the formal knowledge that they have. So the trick is then, how do you activate this other kinds of intuitive, informal ways of thinking and reasoning, even if it's wrong? And the controversial idea that was put forth, and now it seems, based on this discussion, it's very obvious that we should do this. But 20 years ago, when we were proposing these experiments, to say, let's activate wrong knowledge, that was, blasphemous, because people would say, well, if you do that, they will remember that wrong knowledge. Right? So again, and the one mechanism that helps people uncover without fearing failure is this failure-based activation system that I talk about in the book. Okay, and if you can marshal the design of that, then you have kids coming into your lecture, before the lecture, or before instruction, already have thought about a particular thing that they're going to learn in many different ways. And that's where the multiplicity, the multidisciplinarity of any domain comes in. And if you activate all of that, that's a resource kids learn with. I just want to add one more point. There are exceptional individuals who, through their lives, in spite of their circumstances, will make it big. Kudos to them. Excellent.
Why should they be exceptions?
No. What productive failure is trying to do is to normalize that. Can we get everybody in the classroom
Absolutely.
comfortable with initial failure and exploration? So that we build the very capacities of generating ideas, working through failure, persisting through failures, as Winston Churchill said. And these are things that you can develop. and not just let it to individual differences. Some people are and some people are not. And I think that's what we want to do. That's the bigger challenge that we want to take on as the education system. How do we get everybody to build this skill set? And that's what we want to do here.
Right. So, are we ready for something like this?
You know, it will take time, but we should prepare the ground for that. It's very important to do that. I'll share with you two examples of calculated failures we promote in our system. In small classes, primary classes particularly, the teachers give project work to the students, young students, and they take on the project and bring that project. And we never bother to check whether it is originally done by the child or the parent or bought from the market. And the perfect project will get that 5-star rating. Failure 1. Second, there is an internal assessment component in board examination. In almost every subject, at least 30 marks of internal assessment and 70 marks of theory. Balaji also knows that. For the past many decades, there is no correlation between the internal assessment and the external assessment. Internal assessment is always skewed. So that means there are many other considerations other than merit for assessment. So that leads to calculated failure. We are not promoting the merit. It's a failure of the system. So this rat race for marks, benchmarking, of course, it's agreeable. But this rat race for marks is leading us to failure. So even after winning the race, a rat remains rat. So that rat race we should avoid, and we need to create a culture of promoting merit. And education is all about encouragement. So if you deeply analyze the society, failure is mostly affecting the middle class. They don't want to fail their children. The higher strata of the society, they are not worried about the failure. Even with the lower strata of the society, they are not much worried. Mostly the middle class, they are struggling with the failure thing. So fear of failure. So we need to develop the culture of encouragement in the society, particularly through education.
It's only you two, people like you two can do it. Because you are occupying offices that can actually make
To your question, are we ready? I have a question to you. Do we have options? The world is changing. If we are not going to change, we will be pushed, to the way things are happening. I tell you one or two very small anecdotes which will probably, disturb you. Couple of months back when I was in US, when my daughter-in-law had come after delivery, the baby was being brought home. Along with the package they were delivered, there was a small book which said, curriculum for the first 2 weeks.
Was that for the mother?
Well, what the mother or that, as a curriculum designer, I was shocked. 3 months later, the lady walked into my house and asked me that I want to see the mother and the baby. And I asked, who are you? She said, I'm an interventional pedagogue. I thought I had no idea. So from that goal we are going. When I went couple of years back, when I went to Meerut for a lecture, I was having a conversation with children. And one of the students stood up. I have quoted it in some of my training program also. One of the students stood up, class 11, and asked a question. I was talking about education. He asked me a question. And the question I thought was silly. Right? I shouldn't use the word here, but consciously I'm using the word. Because the question he asked me was, sir, where do you buy your milk? I said, what this has to do with the education lecture I have given? Sir, please answer that. I said, I buy it from the milk booth. Where do you buy your drugs? Sir, I go by to the near shop, medical shop and buy it. Where do you buy cosmetics? I felt like, there's nothing to do with what I have talked. He said, please answer my question. And I have no option. I said, go to the mall. When you want a milk, you go to a milk shop. When you want drugs, you go to the medical shop. Why should I go to the same school for physics, chemistry and biology? That's the future. That is the future. Okay, so the systems are changing as was rightly pointed out. It is not only at the tertiary stage, but even at the secondary stage, things are changing. But the problem that we have in this country is that the number game, right? The huge number game, and therefore, and also a lack of congruence in the policy between the central and the state levels at various times. Everybody who comes to the position says that what I know is only education. Education is something which nobody knows, because the education is a process of discovery, right? To me. And let me conclude with a very small thing. We don't allow our children to think. I was very happy with the last topic he has used, Jugaad. I think we have negated Jugaad. The whole alchemy, when we talk about alchemy was a process of productive failure, because we never got gold till today, but hundreds and thousands of things we got through that process. Right? Similarly, today our children, they don't get us what we want, but they are able to deliver so many things which they are capable of. And I think that's the productivity. We have an ability to, that. I have just small anecdote and stop there. I read somewhere, many of my teachers might have known that it so happened in one of the schools in UK, I suppose, that a teacher goes to the class in 8th class and administers a test. And one of the questions in the test was that how do you measure the height of a building using a barometer, right? And a barometer is used for pressure, right? Everybody writes the answer, and this one fellow writes the answer. The teacher gives him 0 out of 10. And the boy says, my answer is right. The teacher says, your answer may be right, but that's not what I want. And that's exactly what my teachers say most of the times now. So this boy says, he argues, and finally they bring him an arbitrator who will decide who is right, who is wrong. And the arbitrator gives him white paper and asks him to write the answer, and he gives a blank answer back. And the arbitrator tells him, you seem to be stupid, you don't know the answer. He says, I have many answers, I don't know which answer you want. And he says, come on, tell me what are the answers. The boy says, I take the barometer to the top of the building, I tie a rope to that, allow the rope to fall down, I measure the height of the rope, that's the height of the building. I don't need any mathematics for that. I take the rope to the top of the building, attach a pendulum to that, find the oscillation of the pendulum, from that I calculate what is the height of the building. I take the barometer to the top of the building, find what is the value of G there, what is the value of G here, from the difference I calculate what is the height of the building. I keep the barometer on the sunshine, I find what is the height of the shadow of the barometer, I find what is the height of the shadow of the building, from ratio and proportion I calculate what is the building. I walk every step to the upside and find the change in that, and I calculate what is the height of the building. Sir, it's height, lunchtime, remember that on the way there's a storekeeper who knows the correct answer. You tell him, if I tell the correct answer, I give you a beautiful barometer. That's also a correct answer, sir. Right? And he was said to be none other than a Nobel laureate, Niels Bohr. We are not allowing people to think, otherwise India would have several Nobel laureates. That's my view.
That's right. The straight-jacketed nature of our education system, I think that's stifling quite a bit of our demographic dividend that we could have reaped. Manu, I have to ask you this question, and thanks to Mr. Subramaniam for bringing that to my to everybody's notice. Martin Seligman, this fantastic psychologist, thinker. His autobiography, The Hope Circuit, fabulous iteration of this idea of failure, how you can emerge from that. He was like in the pits of depression, and he became his own case study in a way. How, and you have delved into psychology quite a bit. Was that idea there? This idea of turning failure into a circuit of hope. Was that in your mind at all?
Slightly different from that, because that's what I call failure that naturally happens in our lives. You know, things would happen at work, at play, at relationships, with children. You know,
Your
yourself.
football career.
Exactly, man. So these are things that naturally happen, and depending on how we have developed to that point, we have certain capabilities or not of dealing with those. Productive failure, yes, if you can turn that failure into something good and productive, again, great, that's good. What we're talking productive failure is before we even get to that point. How can we build capabilities in our kids that even when they land or when they take high stakes or when they land in situations where they are depressed or other challenges, they're better capable of dealing with those. I think it's that path that we need to nurture.
Capability building, essentially.
Exactly. And children, if you look at the steepest learning curves of our lives, they happen in the first 10 years or so of your lives. A child never looks at, oh, what's your mindset and what's the culture? You know, they just act, they just go and they just do things. They learn, they make an error, they get up, they try something else, somebody gives them feedback and they learn from that. That's productive failure. Somehow, that at least in the post-industrial era, that capability that we should have been actually promoting and developing even further when they come to school is something that we undercut.
Is it because of since you talk about this post-industrial world, and there is definitely economic determinism at play here, because we are so concerned about the bottom line. It cannot be allowed to dip, and which is why we are just averse to failure, which is why we cannot even incorporate it into our systems and processes.
Because we're thinking of failure as one thing. What our evidence, the science suggests that these two are not opposites of each other. You can incorporate in a principled way failure early on as you learn things, so that on the very things you don't want failure, the metrics, people having been left behind, skill development, all of these things are actually improved. It's not my opinion, that's the scientific evidence. And it's not just from me, but from other labs who've replicated and reproduced the work. And here's the thing, we're not even saying that you don't have to compromise. If you switch, if you're a school teacher or a principal or running a school, our evidence shows that if you were to shift your pedagogical model from, say, a current model of traditional instruction to productive failure students will appear to be up to 2 academic years on the same benchmarks that you value ahead of their peers. This is not an incremental effect. Right? So again, there is a design, there's a way, a principled way to act and actually do things in the school, in the education system, backed by science, without compromising the other benchmarks we want to achieve, right?
Right. Concluding remarks. Everybody, 10 seconds each, because we are running out of time. I would have loved to take some questions from the esteemed audience. Unfortunately, I'll have to let go of that because the panel has been absolutely astounding.
I'm going to go off on a tangent. You know, I was just looking at everybody in this room, educationists, ambassadors, all of these people have got collective wisdom and have now moved on perhaps from their principal work, whatever it may have been. And they collectively represent wisdom beyond a particular point because there's very little at risk. This kind of wisdom needs to somehow be tapped into. This very fashionable thing today that we shouldn't employ people beyond 45 years because they have more energy and blah, blah, blah. It's what Manu said. It's, I think, what you said. At what point of time does that wisdom, that lived experience come into play? Each person here has lived experience, and we know it ourselves as we grow or as we age, that the decisions that we took, say, at 18 or 24 or 32 or 45 or 62 or whatever, continues to change the same situation, but your response changes. And your response changes primarily because of your lived experience and your immediate socialization or the existing politics. So what is it that we can do within the education system to be able to harness them? I mean, what we do at Salam Bharat Trust is we get a lot of these people to come in and speak with our kids, in many ways preparing, as Manu said, for that failure. Not all 100% of our kids succeed. Many of them, because of depression, because of where they are, they're not able to find the path into a very productive this thing. So what do we need to do that? If we can tap into this, and apologies to this closing comment, but I really feel that this, in this demographic dividend that we have, we keep forgetting that at the senior level, productivity does not stop at 60 or 65. There is a value for productivity, looking at what they may have determined in terms of their own feelings, but can they find a way to be able to overcome that and share that, because there's nothing else for them to lose.
Right. Any last thoughts?
Well, concluding my remark, I must say that having been seen Dr. Manu, I'm seeing him for the first time today. I think the agenda for me in 2026 is to hold a conference celebrating failure with Dr. Manu being the chief guest to tell them why failure should be done. I think that's going to be my agenda. That's my conclusion.
Thank you. I'm going to give last word to the author.
So, society is evolving. Our school education is also changing. A lot of conditioning and encouragement is required in that field. So, thoughts like productive failure, we need to bring into the classroom. We need to talk more about it to avoid calculated failure. That awareness creation should happen, and for that, we need people like Manu to have dialogue with the society, dialogue with the schools, teachers, parents, and the community as a whole. So together, we should head for a new time.
Right, and Manu should actually work with people like you, because you are in the position to implement certain things that have been talked about on this stage.
Right, so thank you. Couple of things. One of the things we didn't talk about today was resilience and mental health and well-being. And a byproduct of implementing productive failure in the classrooms is people get accustomed to failing, pivoting, trying again, failing, pivoting. You're slowly building both creativity, resilience. So the mental health crisis that we have is kind of a byproduct that we can try, attempt to solve, or at least alleviate through productive failure intervention. But my last word is this. You know, we used to think that, historically, from a theoretical standpoint, learning theories, psychological theories, that motivation drives action. Engagement, interest drives action. Mindsets, we talked about mindsets and values, they drive action. Modern theory suggests it's the other way around as well. Action drives motivation. Action drives mindset change. What that means is we do not have to wait for mindsets and cultures and values to change. It's action by the teacher, by the school, by districts, by system. Action by government.
By government.
Not waiting for each other. Action is what's going to drive that change we need.
Right. Thank you so much. And I would like to extend a quick thank you before we wrap it up to Mr. Agarwal, who could not join us in time, and this event would not have been possible without him. Thank you so much. Thank you, Manu, for writing this fantastic book. And as I was telling you before we got up on the stage, this is something that I can use in my lecture halls. If any student is cribbing about my pedagogy, I'm going to give this book. Hey, this is what I'm doing, and it's now backed by science. So thank you very much. Thank you everybody. And I've had a great time up on this stage with you all. And I'm sure the audience here has taken quite a bit from productivity to failure to looking at economic policy, education policy, creative world. I think we have covered quite some ground. And thank you very much again for making it possible. Thanks a lot.